There's a new book out. It runs, let me have a look, 115 pages. It's a small book. It's written by a man named Paul Ogilvie-Lee. The book is called Seeing Through a Cloud. This book tells the inspiring story about how Paul coped with all the changes and challenges he faced on his long journey of recovery following a severe brain injury. The doctors did not have much hope, but with the strength of his family, Paul worked on regaining his memory and eventually his life. He tells us of the strategies he used to help his memory in everyday circumstances. The aim of the book is to help others in similar situations, to get their lives back and succeed in living as Paul has done. Of course, we can all use these strategies to help our memory, but they are especially useful for anyone who's undergone trauma such as Paul suffered. As a 30-year-old qualified doctor, Paul has had to go from total incontinence with no memory of his past or present life back to a thinking, feeling adult. It has been a very long journey, and we're going to travel it with him after 10 because it's an interesting and fascinating story. There's a guy who, like I said, 30-year-old doctor. He went to the University of Otago, moved to Melbourne, and it was there he got hit by a car. And the doctors were surprised he survived. And there is plenty of discussion to be had about how he did what he did, got his life back, not perfectly. Had a call, got married, yes. Had a call from Mrs. Producer had a call from a woman who went to a presentation he did last night and said it's an amazing story and how fabulous it was hearing him. So we will look forward to that after the news. Here's a quote from someone who went to university with him, another doctor, who is a professor of emergency medicine. Had Paul become a professor of neurosurgery, giving lectures on major brain injuries and teaching generations of medical students, then we would have learnt less about the major brain injuries than we can learn from his story of recovery. So in having the accident, by fate, he has contributed to the knowledge of brain injuries to the medical profession to some considerable extent. So, as you could see, this will be an interesting discussion. The book is called Seeing Through a Cloud, a long journey back to living after a brain injury by Paul Ogilvie-Lee. And I want to quote you from the introduction, the foreword, that's written by Dr. Micah Dar, who's Professor of Emergency Medicine, University of Otago, Christchurch Emergency Medicine physician, Canterbury District Health Board. Paul's story provides, he's referring to what he said earlier, so let me go back to the previous line. Describing these achievements in the way he does not just do justice to the hard work needed to get there and the many challenges faced on the way. However, Paul's story does provide that detail. It also provides detail of the many of the tricks that Paul used and still uses to live independently and well, such as relearning the piano one hand at a time and then using both at once, or learning juggling for the first time in his life in a similar way, one hand at a time, then both together. If you missed it before when I described the book, Paul was a 30-year-old doctor in Melbourne. He's a Kiwi, but he was in Melbourne, and he got hit by a car and suffered severe brain damage, amongst other things. He made a comeback successfully, as we're about to see. The story is a fascinating one, and we have an acquaintance in common, a very good friend of Paul's, a fellow called Murray Beagley, who's plastic and reconstructive surgeon in Auckland, who fixed my finger once a few years ago. Good bloke. So, on that basis, Paul, good morning.
Good morning.
Now, you came back from basically nowhere,
yep,
to the point where you have travelled independently,
yes,
to Europe and other places, that you have done the things that I just mentioned with piano and what have you.
Yeah.
You write, you do books,
yes,
you do other things,
mm-hmm,
but you never became the neurosurgeon that you thought that you would.
No, I wouldn't be able to, mainly because my memory can be very strong, but can also be very weak. I can often remember part of something, but not the exact details. of something I'm looking for.
My understanding is that you remember nothing about the accident and nothing about life before then.
No, nothing for basically the 4 months before I have minuscule memory of, and even the 1 year I have nothing of after the injury. I don't remember the injury, of course, and the year after that I have minuscule pieces of 1 or 2. Then it becomes sporadic for the next couple of years, and then it starts to regain, but slowly. Again, I can remember parts of facts. For example, I can remember that I went on a holiday to somewhere, but I can't remember the exact details of what parts I went to or how long.
Mm-hmm. Was that one instance, or was that
repeated?
Repeated.
Yes. Even holidays that I've been on, for example, I've been on 2 holidays down to Lake Tiana, one 14 years ago and one this year.
Mm-hmm.
I can remember the difference, but not to extreme detail.
This discussion we're going to have is just going to jump all over the place.
Yeah.
Do you feel that you have been robbed of the life that you could have had?
It's definitely altered. I feel what I've learnt from it, I wouldn't have learnt if I had carried on to become a plastic surgeon or become a neurological surgeon. I did want to become a neurosurgeon. That's the career I'd chosen in the couple months prior to the injury.
Mm-hmm.
But I wouldn't have understood how to help other people going through what I'm going through to the same detail if I had carried on with that and not had the injury.
How much have you done with helping other people?
Well, I've written the book, which I hope people will be able to understand, and to enlarge that, I got Adrienne to edit it, AB Publishing. AM, not AB. Because I knew that what I'd written may be too medical for people to understand, and I wanted it to be something people could understand.
Now, I find that interesting. Your command of language is good.
Getting better.
Did you have to start from the beginning?
Yes. In the early stages, I would say something that I don't remember, of course, in the first year post-injury, but my parents said it didn't make sense. They were with me, but I'd say something, but it did not make sense. I've worked hard to regain a vocabulary that allows me to express in detail what I mean by something by testing my knowledge on the press in Christchurch. Each morning comes out with a word fit where you try and put the words into order, and I would do that most mornings if I was free in the morning. You have done it,
yeah. You would do it every morning if you...
Yeah, when I'm free I do it just to try and include my vocabulary that's available.
So it's ongoing.
Yeah.
Enjoyable?
Yep. Very enjoyable. I find it difficult to read and remember.
You're not the only one that has that problem.
If I'm reading a book, if I jump away and don't come back to it for a while, I find it very hard to remember the chapters that I've read.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I don't think I'm alone on that one.
You're not alone on that. Yeah. It is 15 after 10. Paul Ogilvie-Lee, Seeing Through a Cloud, a long journey back to living after a brain injury. After the ad break, I want to ask you, I know you don't remember, but I want to ask you what happened with the accident.
Yeah.
15 past 10, News Talk ZB. Paul Ogilvie-Lee, the author of Seeing Through a Cloud, a long journey back to living after a brain injury. Now, Paul, just to recap, Paul was a 30-year-old doctor when he was bowled by a car. Now, we've just gone through that. You were in Melbourne and you were crossing a road and it was raining.
So I've been told, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah.
But there was one little aspect to this. He just got bowled. But there was one little aspect you mentioned to me a moment ago. You said without this, you wouldn't be here.
Yes. There just happened to be a nurse from the Alfred within a couple of feet beside me, so I've been told, who made sure that I was ventilated because I wasn't breathing. And that allowed things to carry on until the ambulance came to take me to the Alfred.
And then a bunch of people came out from houses with umbrellas and held them over you both and what have you. So you were at, when you first went to Melbourne as a doctor, you were at the Prince Alfred Hospital.
Yeah, when I was...
Yeah. And it was a nurse from that hospital, even though you weren't... it's just coincidental. I know Prince Alfred quite well. The journey back was long.
Very long.
And it's still ongoing.
Yes.
Did you ever feel like you weren't going to make it? Did you ever feel like giving up?
Fortunately, no. I had very good support from my parents and family and friends. They were always encouraging me to trial things. And I was lucky in that the first major thing I think I achieved was being able to go to the gym and remember my timetable, complete my gym program, and walk back to where my parents' work was on my own.
How did that make you feel?
Very pleased that I was able to achieve something on my own, because before that I'd required nursing, physiotherapy, parental guidance. I mean, they must have had a few very nervous moments wondering if I was going to step in front of another moving vehicle or something just by not being as observant when crossing the road, or because I'm sure my behaviour was less than normal, would be classed in most circumstances.
How old are you now?
Now, this year I will be 55.
See, I'm testing you. He's doing good. He's passing.
I was good at maths. That was my best subject, but...
Really?
Yeah.
And you didn't lose that?
Not so much, no. The mathematical ability stayed more so than grammatical understanding. People would say something to me. I think the best example of the understanding not being there, it used to really annoy me in the early stages when there were arguments on TV. I'd become very yes, no. There was right and wrong, so what was there to argue about? And I couldn't bear it when people I knew, you could hear it at a restaurant or in a cafe, in the shops, you hear people arguing, like, what are they arguing about? I mean, there's only right and wrong. And even on TV programs. But that was not that they were wrong, it was just that I couldn't perceive. It was a discussion that sounded like they were going to have fisticuffs over it to me, because I had that high sensitivity, I think.
Well, I mean, I feel the same as you. What do people argue over? There's only right and wrong. There's right and wrong, and people who don't agree with me are wrong. So, therefore, what's the point in having an argument?
Yeah.
Can't win with somebody who doesn't know the difference.
No.
No. Unfortunately, it's getting worse, I have to say.
Yeah.
I want to, when we come back after a few minutes, after news headlines, I want to get into the tricks that you started employing to help you develop.
Yes.
And how they can help other people, etc. But before we take a break, you got married?
Yes.
At what age?
The age that I was married, well, let's see, that would be 40, about to be 40, 40.
40. So 10 years roughly after.
It was almost 10 years to the day after the injury.
And Carmel?
Yes.
Is your wife?
Yes.
Children?
No.
No? Did you propose to her?
Yes.
Or did she propose to you?
No, I did propose to her.
How long did you go out for?
Well, I knew Carmel very well. She looked after my brother's children for many years, And I used to, because I was in Christchurch, but my brother was living in Wellington, I used to come up often and tell some jokes that I thought were incredibly funny. I don't know if the same jokes were ones that Carmel enjoyed. But we knew each other quite well before, and then after the injury, when we spent some time, we had a friendship that became stronger for just over half a year before we were married. And
that would have been a beautiful day.
Yes.
Let me just quote you a little from the chapter, Rediscovering My Academic Brain. After attending Hagley Community College studying whole brain learning for a year, I then added biology while repeating whole brain the following year. Then after that, I repeated biology and added chemistry and maths and sat school certificate and passed in both. They were subjects, keep in mind, this is a man who was a qualified doctor before things changed. They were subjects I'd studied at school in my pre-med years and the possibility that they could spark the recovery of pre-existing understandings and memories encouraged me to work harder. With the biology class, good understanding of things explained to me seemed to give no problem being remembered later or retrieved for exams. Then going back to my textbooks with points I didn't understand, retrieval came quite easily, which now, over 20 years later, I feel shows that my understanding of some things post-injury was more greatly affected than others. Whether it was paragraphs, words or sentences that were affected, I'm not sure, as there is no consistency, in my case, with the difficulty in understanding specific items each day. I feel it would also be different in each individual's case post-injury. Now, we will get into some of the ways that Paul learned to teach himself and the tricks he utilised to get where he is today from someone who started with nothing. News Talks at B28 to 11. Seeing Through a Cloud, a long journey back to living after a brain injury by Paul Ogilvie-Lee. And again, let me, for those who weren't with us at the beginning, Paul was a 30-year-old doctor, a graduate from Otago, but he was working in Melbourne. Crossed the road, rainy day, got whacked by a car, and when I say whacked, I mean badly, and was very lucky to survive serious brain injury, and for a lengthy period of time, let's just say that he started from scratch. He didn't know anything. He didn't know his family, didn't recognize anybody, didn't know who he was, didn't know anything. But he came back bit by bit by bit. Now, we've had an interesting conversation during the break, and we'll include some of that. But tell me, at what point after the accident did you start to make progress? What point did you... Now, you told me something about they told you couldn't do neurosurgery. I don't want to forget this, because you'd chosen neurosurgery as your future specialist area about 2 months before the accident.
Yes.
And they told you afterwards you couldn't do it. What was your attitude?
I realised I couldn't do it because of the effects on my memory, and it made me slightly more determined to improve my own abilities at recovery, but I realised I couldn't go in and work as a neurosurgeon in the future.
So you accepted what they told you?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Now, as you set out to do what you could for yourself, take me through the steps.
The first step was I didn't have a distinct memory of things that I had to get done, so I reverted back to the way what I used to use when I was working as a doctor. If I had something important to remember, I'd move my watch from my left arm to my right arm until the task was done. I had to use that when I went to the gym. If there was something on my sheet that I couldn't do, I would have to put my watch on the wrong hand until I could go, because someone else happened to be using the rower or someone else was on the treadmill.
Don't you hate that?
and then I'd go back to it later. But I would also use a notebook, write things down, put my watch on the wrong hand until I had completed the format and tasks that I wished to do, then put my watch back on the right hand. So it was the same task that I had to do before the injury, but to a much higher degree.
The writing that you do now,
yes,
is any different from what you did prior to the accident? When I say the writing, I mean your handwriting, your writing style.
Writing style would be slightly less precise, although doctors are renowned for having difficult writing.
Crap writing, actually.
Yes. But I feel like it's precise, but of course I do. But it may be slightly less.
Can other people read it?
Most of the time, I believe they can.
It's a matter of interest. Why is it that doctors' writing is the way that it is?
I believe it could be partially to the fact that when you have an emergency medicine situation, you have to write a note very quickly while you go back to keep track of how the patient is going, because some things can be life-threatening, but you want to get that note down so that the next personnel or the nursing staff are going to know that something is that urgent.
Yeah. Now, changing the watch from one hand to the other, one arm to the other, was that your idea?
That was a method I used back in my school days.
But how did you remember that?
I didn't remember it originally. That's how weak my memory was until I was having trouble remembering my gym format, and my mother reminded me just prior to it being, I think, 2 or 2.5 years. You used to put your watch on the wrong hand, and when she reminded me of that, I then started to use it again. But then, just because I was a determined young man, I worked out that if I put it on the wrong hand and put it upside down, it made it even more difficult to look at the time. So there was 2 things to remember.
So what else besides that did you employ on your journey?
Apart from moving my watch and having a notebook, always attempting to master a new area, a new subject. I realised I couldn't attempt to do a lot of subjects straight away at the same time. That's why I did the whole brain. Well, that was my parents that led me to doing whole brain first, then whole brain and adding the biology, then the next year the biology and the chemistry. The next year was the maths, and after many years of going to Hagley Community College, that was when I attempted to go back to university.
Right, now you've just run through those things that you did. First this, then that, then that, then that. Is that easily recalled by you now? I mean, you just ran through it.
Moderately easily recalled, yes. It was after the first 1.5 years at Hagley that I started to drive, because I sat the driving test and was allowed to drive. And I remembered it because I had to drive to specific areas for the subjects.
Was the driving test easy?
I was computer-based, and then I had to go on to a hospital-based vehicle with someone beside me to check that I was...
Then you're still driving?
Yeah.
Obviously. Well, that surprises me, pleasantly, I have to say, on your behalf. Now, your parents were incredible, I believe.
They were. They left New Zealand. The hospital, so I've been told, someone rang my brother and my parents, and my parents were on a plane heading over to Australia within a very short space of time, and they lived in Australia for the period that I was there to be with me.
How long was that?
Very minusculely short of 1 year.
So they just upended themselves, went to Australia and took care of you?
Yes.
Well, that's what being a parent's all about, I guess. But you were very lucky.
Very lucky.
And you thought for quite a while that your mother was the carer.
I have been told, of course I don't remember it, but I kept saying, oh, you look like her, but you don't do the things she does. If you told my mother, I know she'd come, but it was totally unpredictable whether I would recognise my mother, my brother, or my father, or my sister when they came in. Some I would recognise and some I wouldn't.
17 to 11, last segment with Paul Ogilvie-Lee, and the book is called Seeing Through a Cloud, A Long Journey Back to Living After a Brain Injury. He came back from nothing, started all over again. Now, Carmel, your wife, told me a cute story before the break. It appealed to me anyway, during a previous break. I mean, it appealed to me. Tell me how you or did you mention that on air before, that she was caring for your brother's children, I think? No?
Yes, she was.
Yeah.
Carmel lived in Wellington when I was in Christchurch, and at mid-school and then working and living in Christchurch, I came often to my brother for holidays. And as she was caring for his children, now I hear the story of how I used to always manage to be in the same situation where I would be talking with Carmel when she was trying to look after the children.
Mm-hmm.
Which didn't become a major problem, but I'm not sure if the children were thrilled at that uncle of theirs interfering with them getting some attention.
Yeah, and then you did tell us this on air, not that, but you said that your niece told you that this...
Well, when I was visiting Wellington, this would have been about 8 years post-injury, and we were having a discussion, and my youngest niece happened to be beside me and said, when Carmel went somewhere to another room for, I forget the reason, and she said, she likes you. Which made me think, oh. So we went on a holiday together, and things happened fairly quickly from there.
So this is the bit I like. You proposed the holiday. You would have suggested that.
Yes.
So the two of you go off together, not having had any sort of relationship.
No.
I'm not going to ask any more questions. But then you proposed to her. How long after that holiday?
Actually, no. Another memory has just come back. This is how
it works.
Erratic my memory.
Yeah.
Because Carmel enjoyed the holiday, she invited me to join her family for Christmas. A pre-Christmas dinner.
I see a pattern here.
A pre-Christmas dinner, and I made a slight remark saying, oh, if I come up, things could happen. And I think that from there, we both realised we enjoyed each other's company enough to form a commitment.
Mm-hmm. Any regrets?
No.
No. Well, I can tell you something. She loves you beyond belief. She is so in love with you. She's got tears in her eyes at the moment. So's Mrs. Producer. The tissues are out. Now I've forgotten where I was going. With an emotional moment like that. I want to read you an email. It comes from somebody I know. And this is somebody who has also been through a major physical trauma. And I'll tell you in advance, this individual was involved in a motorbike accident and lost a leg and a hip. And he lives in Invercargill. His name is the same as mine. And he says, so enjoying your interview with Dr. Paul Ogilvie-Lee. His story, of course, is utterly fascinating, and naturally I'm now going to seek out his book, Seeing Through a Cloud, A Long Journey Back to Living After a Brain Injury, at our local library. We can all gain an insight into what it's like living with adversity through learning from examples such as Dr. Paul's. He is a living miracle, and I defy anybody to challenge that. And I'd agree with that. Come back with you shortly. Rod Gendon, good morning.
Oh, my God, what a story, Leighton. That's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is. And I've picked up some juicy bits off air.
Oh, well, yeah. No, it's incredible. Definitely going to buy his book, I know that.
Good man. It's It's a book. Let me just put it this way: the idea is that the book is going to be of assistance to people who are in similar positions. Yeah,
absolutely. Just want to hear the story as well. So yeah.
Anyway, you're entitled to sell me something. The book "Seeing Through a Cloud" by Paul is Dr. Paul. We better call him, although he doesn't. It's not on the cover. Paper Plus at Remuera, Scorpio Books in Christchurch, Otago and Auckland University Bookshop. Otago and Auckland University Bookshops. And when Doris is in an hour's time, we'll make sure that she gets it in stock as well. Can I call you doctor legitimately or not?
If you want to.
Yeah, I will. With Dr. Paul Ogilvie-Lee. We haven't got long. I want to get from you... Who can the book help? Your experiences, your learnings, not just people with brain injury, but others.
Well as people with brain injuries, you've got their carers, their families, their supporters. People can't understand why it is that person that had an injury similar to someone else has a different problem. Each neurological problem, whether it's brain injury, stroke caused, will be different because everyone's brain works differently. If we're all identical, I think life wouldn't be quite as interesting.
It's boring as hell.
Yeah. So if someone has had a stroke, if someone is born with a neurological difficulty, or if someone has an injury like mine or a minor one, it may be different, but they can attempt some of the strategies I use to improve my abilities. Or even someone that hasn't had a brain injury, if they wish to try and improve their memory, their abilities, and their general living, they can read about and then attempt some of the strategies I used. It may work, it may not. But you'll never know.
Somebody gave me a figure about the number of brain injuries in New Zealand a day. I don't believe it. I don't want to repeat it. Do you know what the answer is?
I know the answer is very high.
Over 100 a day?
Yes.
I'm telling. Well, this includes everything from almost unnoticeable to serious, but I find that extraordinary.
Because some injuries are so minor that your own personal brain can rewire itself to the point that it will not exist 24 hours later.
This rewiring...
Yes. A good example would be, say someone is at home and they had forgotten to place something away and they tripped over it, fell on the floor and banged their head, we'll say this, mildly onto a hard surface.
Yeah.
That may well interfere with the workings of part of their brain to a level giving them not quite the balance they had and the ability to walk steadily, but... because it may include very small quantities of the brain's large area, the next day they may have perfect balance and be able to walk perfectly. I feel as a way of explaining a brain injury doesn't have to be evident for very long.
Right. I have to conclude, regretfully. I interviewed a man many years ago who had severe burn injuries all over his face and the rest of his body. He said something to me I've never forgotten. It's not what happens to you, it's what you do with it. You are another example. Congratulations, and thank you so much. If anything's happened to anybody in your life, or you, or whatever, you get into a groove on something like this, and it's difficult to, after that discussion, it's difficult to launch into anything else. Although nursing has a lot to do with it. Here's one thing that I want to convey to you, because I asked him this during a break, but we never got to it. I said to him, asked him, you're aware of the nurses' strike, what have you? I said, what do you think? Now, not verbatim, but this is exactly the sentiment. I wouldn't deviate from it for a moment. He's very upset, Paul Ogilvie-Lee, very upset with the structure of the DHBs. And it was music to my ears with what he said. He's angry that there are... No, he started out this way. He said, when I was practicing, and this intrigued me because of all of the what's gone before. When I was practicing, he said, doctors ran the hospitals. Now there are many people earning more than doctors, and they're mismanaging. And the structure of the DHB needs to change. So he doesn't fall into, he is in line with my thoughts, certainly, and those of plenty others. It infuriates me when you think that the management structure of the hospital is so top-heavy. There is so much money that goes into management, with people earning much more than the people at the coalface, which is what healthcare is all about. I don't know the figures, but I do know the sort of money that's paid, and I do know that they're top-heavy, and I can't believe that it's appropriate. Tom, good morning.
Yeah, hey there. How are you, Len?
I'm pretty good.
Oh, man, I had tears listening, and I'm at work, too, in an open plan office, so it was a little bit embarrassing, but man, oh, man, what a powerful, emotional discussion that was. My situation is I've got a mom. She's 83 years old, my one surviving parent, and she had a stroke 13 months ago now.
Got an acquired brain injury in a motor vehicle accident when I was an engineer working at Kew Hospital in the early 90s.
Mm-hmm.
And I was rapt with the interview that you've just had.
I'm glad.
Yeah, it was because it's a horrifically challenging journey, because one of the big issues for me was that it took 5 years of my telling the GP that my brain didn't work the way it used to work, and Denise, my partner, who stood by me all the way through, we both actually sat and cried openly with happiness and joy when I was finally diagnosed in Dunedin Hospital with a significant brain injury. And that really was the easy part, Leighton, because a sister-in-law of mine was telling people that I was an ACC fraudster and there was nothing wrong with me because you don't look injured, Leighton, if you haven't been badly smashed up. And I wasn't badly smashed up. It was a hoon went through a giveaway sign and T-boned me in the driver's door. And so I had to... I wasn't totally gaga, but I had to learn how to walk again properly, talk properly. I still have minor difficulties when I get tired. And, for example, when I was up at Burwood Pain Clinic, they put me in a swimming pool and I couldn't walk because I got whacked on the right-hand side of my head, and I had to tell my left side what to do. And I had been a disabled ski instructor before. I couldn't ski after the accident because my left leg just wouldn't do it. And I was lucky because I had above average intellect in my head, and that was still there, but it was all the cognitive little bits like the short-term memory. You would want that my start mechanism in my head was damaged, and I'd have honest intention to do something, but I couldn't start. And then when I started something, I couldn't complete a task because the brain said, I don't like doing this, go and do something else. For example, just to make the bed in the bedroom before Denise got home from work, I'd have every intention, and in the end, the occupational therapist said to me, close the bedroom door, John, and do not leave until you make the bed. But I would go towards that door 10, 15 times. And so I totally relate to that stuff. But one of the other really bad things, Leighton, ACC, because I live in a little village in central south and central bush, people thought I was an ACC fraudster, so they were ringing ACC, and I was forever having private investigators, ex-cops, trying to catch me doing something that I couldn't do. And so it was really like living in Russia.
Tell me, ever been to Russia?
Yes, I have.
Where'd you go?
I drove a tour coach. I did a summer season driving tour coaches for a company called Transit Travel, so I did a 5-week...
That was in the 80s?
70s.
70s, all right.
Yep.
I've only got a minute left, and now I'm hurrying because I want to hear I'd like to hear what you've got to say. Where did you go? What was the best place you went in Russia?
It was fascinating. It was really Petersburg. St. Petersburg was interesting, and Moscow was interesting, but it was so different way back then. And I'm looking at the World Cup. The people are so different now. Leighton.
I was there, John. I was there in January of 1989, and we could probably compare notes sometime. Can I just maybe put it to you, writes Nick? It is not just the DHBs, but also, and I presume you mean MMP, it is incorporations to councils, from schools to community centres. Everywhere you go, professionals are controlled by administrative bureaucrats. It is structured in that way and will not go away soon. Then he concludes, if people don't get behind Trump, we'll regret it for a long time. And I'll take from that last line what he means is the example that Trump is setting in restructuring things that have failed. It's 11:28. News Talks a Big. Doris has just walked in. We will, we'll invite her in here in about 14 minutes. Cheers, 28 to 12. Numbers 0800 80 1080. Email Leighton at newstalksab.co.nz. Speaking of emails, Paul Ogilvie's account of his life is truly inspiring, not just because of his determined spirit, his friends and parents' support, or his friendship and commitment between Carmel and him in his marriage. Rather, I'm encouraged by how all of the aforementioned good things in his life came together and contributed to his recovery. It just goes to show that things such as personal responsibility, good parenting, and strong committed marriages and families are keys to a meaningful life. These values should be defended, for the meaning of our very lives depend on them all. He's only 55. Lots more time for him, Carmel, and for him and Carmel to tell their story to the world. I've had a number like that. For instance, Dr. Paul on the speaking circuit, a must for every corporate and college in New Zealand and beyond. This masterpiece should also be in our schools as part of the NCEA. It would be a good idea, if you want a copy sent to you, that you ring her and leave a message, because then she'll have some idea of how many books to order. So, what's the number?
522-5211, or you can email me, doris.mersdale@extra.co.nz.
Do you want to mention the price?
It's $32.50, and there will be postage on that. We've charged $4 postage, yes.
Okay.